The leaders of Russia and China met Wednesday for the second time in 2 months. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping shook hands on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Kazakhstan. The SCO has 9 member nations, among them China, Russia, India, and Iran. There are also regional dialogue partners, including Saudi Arabia and Egypt. The group formed in 2001 as a counterpoint to Western alliances, and after this meeting, Xi and Putin agreed to continue cooperation in the face of a, quote, turbulent international situation. To discuss the alliance and its role in the world, we are joined by Markus Garlauskas. He's a veteran of the United States National Intelligence Council and the director of the Atlantic Council's Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. Thank you very much for being with us. How has Russia benefited?
Thanks for the opportunity.
How's Russia benefited from this public relationship with China?
So they benefit in a variety of ways mutually. First and foremost, the alignment of Russia and China allows them both to challenge U.S. leadership as well as the international systems that were put in place after the Second World War. Essentially allows them to reshape the strategic environment that the U.S. and its allies and partners face. In addition, this allows China to support Russia's war against Ukraine, providing the resources necessary to be able to sustain those operations, to continue to drain the resources of the West and again, pose the challenge to U.S. leadership.
And so there's sort of the transactional nature of the interstate commerce the two have to do with each other. And then there is the larger project, which you've mentioned, which is sort of combating the West. How much is this alliance and these other nations that are there, how much is that a part of that larger project? And how robust is that? I mean, in other words, is it rhetorical or is it really an active effort to dominate the Western nations?
Yeah, I think it's more an effort to disrupt and to dominate within their regions. It's not the idea that China and Russia are going to divide up the world together and rule, but it's the idea that they're going to upturn the order, particularly the regional order in their respective regions. Russia wants to reshape the situation in Europe. China wants to, quite literally move the goalposts in the Indo-Pacific. And so they each have that common interest in promoting a breakdown of the international order, a distraction and pulling the United States in different directions. So I think there is a great common cause there. But you're quite right to note the fact that there is a transactional aspect to this. That I would argue the trust between Beijing and Moscow is not particularly deep. The institutions are not particularly strong, and so much of this is also, as I think you alluded at the beginning, personalized to Xi and Putin themselves. And so different leaders, if either one of them leaves the scene, I think that could lead to some changes in how the relationship works. But the basic fundamental principle that they're both aligned and wanting to upend the order in their regions and challenge the United States, I think that's where you really see the strongest alignment.
Markus, you mentioned China's goals, or goalpost moving, I should say, in the Indo-Pacific. Is there any way in which Russia helps China with that goal of its?
Oh, absolutely. So I think Russia, in very practical terms, is leading military resources to be focused on the defense of Europe, on combating its invasion of Ukraine. And these are resources that might otherwise be used to shore up defenses against Chinese aggression, against Chinese attacks. And so there is the practical element there. But also, I think in general, when you look at the challenges that the U.S. and its allies and partners face, the proximal attention that Russia can bring to the deteriorating situation in Europe, the way that it can empower other actors, like empowering North Korea to be a much greater challenge through helping North Korea with advancing its weapons programs and evading sanctions, getting the North Korean regime more resources. These are the sorts of things that Russia can do that can really help pull away focus from the tremendous progress that China is making toward increasing its ability to threaten in the region.
And final question for you, Markus. India's prime minister is not attending this year's summit. Does that mean anything? And place India, if you would, for us in this alliance, but particularly with respect to the project that Russia and China have in destabilizing the West?
Yeah, so I don't think India shares that goal, and India is assiduously non-aligned, not necessarily neutral per se, but it does not have military alliances, but it has a range of strategic partnerships. But I would say we've seen a marked move by India away from Beijing, away from Moscow, as they've escalated their threats to the international order, and as they've behaved in ways that have directly threatened China's interests. When you look at the use of aggressive force and incursions by China to try and change the border between India and China. That's one very proximal example. But in general, Russia's aggression toward Ukraine has caused a lot of problems, a lot of challenges for India as well. Wants to maintain those relationships with Beijing and Moscow, to be sure, but does not want to be associated with this project of trying to upend the world order, or to be seen as helping enemies of the United States or other U.S. allies and partners.
Markus Garlauskas with the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you.